Well, thank you all for coming. We have developed a wonderful partnership with Vanderbilt, and they have started having people come give talks here. And in late June, we're having a kickoff for the first Osher class here that will be in July. So stay tuned. And Lynn Maddox is my contact here. And I just wanted to introduce the 4 poet MDs who have come out tonight. And now Lynn assured me that they have a really great following. They're very popular. So they may not know that. We have Brian Christman over there, who is a pulmonary chief in critical care medicine and the vice chair of Vanderbilt's Department of Medicine and chief medical service at the VA in Tennessee. Okay, Valley Healthcare. Doug Hester is an anesthesiologist. Irene is a writer and medical student, and she has actually published her poetry. Or forthcoming, the Caribbean writer. And Brenda Butka's work has been published in Three Penny Review. And I had another sheet, but I forgot to get it and told you all the wonderful things they do outside of their medical life. So we'll have to ask them to introduce themselves that way, because there were some interesting things that they like to do. So again, let me pass this on to, should we go first? Okay, that's right.
I'm the boss.
That's great.
Okay, we're going to this is going to be sort of a round robin. We're imagining ourselves in a poetic version of the Bluebird Cafe, although we're not on Nashville yet, so, but who knows, that might be coming. We're going to just go around. Each of us will read 2 or 3 poems and say a little bit about the poems as we go along. If you have burning questions, raise your hand, but at the end we can also just chit-chat a little bit. And I'm going to start with Brian over there. When I was a resident, he was my intern at the VA hospital, so we have known each other a very long time. I used to boss him around, and that was a nice thing to do, but now he's the boss, so things change. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian, and why you write poetry and what you do.
Well,
Can everybody hear us okay? Just with the, okay.
okay. I'll be glad to do that, but before I do that, I have to tell a story about Brenda. When you've been awake for way too long, like we used to be as interns, you start having strange thoughts. And so one of my fellow interns suddenly decided to go and spread the word at each of the nursing stations that on the nights off, when Brenda was off call, that she put her hair in a beehive hairdo, had tall heels, and sang with a group called Brenda Butka and the Butkaroos. But then followed up by saying, but don't say anything to her, she'll deny it because she's really modest. Well, so for the next few weeks, people would say, Brenda, we heard about your singing group. And she thought, what on earth? And only your crazy intern could do that to you. So later he confessed, so all of us who were Brenda's intern that year are now known as the Butkaroos.
That's true. Somebody actually made a sign. And there's more to tell. Yes.
But so I'm Brian Christman. I'm vice chair of the Department of Medicine. I work in the residency training program and help take care of the veterans over at the VA hospital most of the time. And I enjoy it a lot. I got into writing, I used to write a long time ago, and I hadn't thought much about it. I gave a talk up in Kentucky, and I was driving back. We were about to go out of town, and I was listening to NPR, and this really great poet was on reading. And I thought, well, I've not heard of this guy. I'll just swing into Davis Kid and grab some of his stuff. This guy named Mark Jarman. So I get on a plane, I'm flying out of town, I'm reading this, and I thought, this is great poetry. I wonder where this guy is. Vanderbilt University, about 2 blocks away. He directed the creative writing program there and has an endowed chair and is a very talented poet, and it kind of flipped a switch and got me writing again. So periodically I write a lot, and then I have periods where I don't seem to have anything to say. But a group of us get together at 5:30 every other Wednesday and try and make each other write and help critique and improve each other's writing. So we have a good time. This first one I'm going to read is called Bird Calls in Autumn. There seemed to be a series of poems about birds, and a number of us have joked a little bit about that, this recurrent theme, so this is part of that series. 100 blackbirds adjust by braille as the chill permeates. 100 blackbirds aligned on a wire meditate on fading sunlight and cast shadows on the chaff. When sleet sets siege, some tuck into magnolia mansions for the winter. All birds become somber so near the earth, and there's much to discuss. I knew a man whose sun-roasted skin twinned the backs of crocodiles in summer when they lay parallel in the shallow muddy and reflect on the sensation of violence preordained. He could foretell phone calls and restore sight to hounds blinded by raccoons. While the weak sun lasts, the wrinkled brown men gather outside the courthouse in a perfect arc to whittle duck calls and reflect on distant victories. Their hoarse stuttering engenders the respect age is due, for there's much to discuss. A fluttering of tanagers filled the aspens near the school this morning. All aspens in a grove are one. One bird's heart burst with the excitement of reunion, and he fell. The chorus was stilled by the breathy tolls of aspen leaves shimmering gold in the breeze. The quiet raven-haired girl with the white eye and the gift of snow palmed the feathery corpse back to class. Soon, just before his peers took flight, she blew airy frost over the beak, restoring its breath. This is the only time this story has been told. I can't really say where that came from, but it just showed up one day, and so thinking about birds, I guess.
So tell us a little bit about that, the birds and the girl with the snowy eye.
The girl with the white eye and a gift of snow. You never quite know where that comes from. It turns out that I may be the whitest person of Indian heritage that you know. And it turned out a few years ago, my sister said, "Why, I thought Dad told you." And my dad said, "Why, I thought Dana told you that I had like a grandmother who was Cherokee." I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting." And so I started thinking about that, and I guess some of that showed up with ideas of magical realism and about gifts of weather control and a different approach to the universe, I guess. So maybe some of it came from there. I'm not quite sure where all the birds come from. Let's see, shall I go for another one? One more, okay. One more and we'll keep going. Let's see. This one, I take care of a lot of veterans, and I think a little bit about them putting themselves on the line, about their families worrying about them. And so this one's called Lapse. The lag time is the shadow. For is anything more futile than a prayer to preserve a son miles distant and hours in the future? Rivulets of sweat leaving forks of clean on a dusty face, the shallow wound no longer oozing on his forehead. With sufficient pause in the fire, a poor conqueree had sounded from his mate in the next foxhole, who could never be mistaken for a red-winged blackbird, even through the artillery smoke in the mist. The camel burned as it always did between his smile on those Oklahoma summer nights in summer when it was so still and hot that the gravity of the prairie moon pulled the smoke straight up before it spread. They joked and smoked and smiled before shrapnel from the last shell separated wheat from chaff. But this all happened some time ago, before we awoke and Father made coffee, before the drive, before the pew, before clarification of the air with incense and the call to silent supplication. I guess I just think about all the families worrying about their loved ones who are far away, and with the time zone, it's hard to know what has occurred. I guess we're always worrying about the people we care about around the world, but with the time lapse, you could never know. So sometimes I wonder, we devote a lot of time to this worry, and I don't know if it's doing any good for anyone. But anyway, I think about the veterans a lot and about them putting themselves on the line for us. Shall I pass the mic over? Here we go.
Well, I'm Doug Hester. I'm an anesthesiologist at Vanderbilt and work mostly with adults, and started down the path of creative writing, I guess in grade school, and then ended up in medicine somehow, and then backed into writing almost as a joke, but got a very positive response from my department and I'm waving to my daughter, who I'm very happy to see here. And so I'm going to read one of the first things I had published about 5 years ago that was written for her. So she is the baby of this one, called First Feeding. As physicians, we still struggle, I guess, with having family at home and being gone a lot. We lie awake in opposite corners of the house. Your babbling crescendo calls me to fetch your bottle. The dog waits until I'm in the nursery before he comes yawning, settling near my cold toes. I feel your body smile as we sit in Edenic dark, our fingers wrapped on the bottle. You stretch, knocking the unwanted formula away. The dog muzzles up the trickle as your wet face pushes into my neck. The hospital awaits, and I must leave to put other people's children to sleep. I set you down. You wiggle in the crib, fingers fumbling at the pacifier. You sigh and roll on your side with eyes closed. The dog knows to go, but I linger on, grateful you let me meet you here again. The ORs might run past bedtime tonight. If so, I promise to come tomorrow, another warm bottle in hand to give. But it's what I'm taking that scares me. The hall light makes my shadow tower over you as I back away. I wonder if today I will do you harm, drag your heart out of Eden with my imperfect love. And this one, I'll just do one more as well, is about a chest x-ray. It was invented by a German named Roentgen, which I can never say well. But I just started thinking about the idea of a chest x-ray, and some other ideas popped up at the same time. They kind of came together. Roentgen's garden. See me glow in the green gown that falls like weeping lantana from my limp arms. Breathe in, hold, all done. I didn't feel your caress, the passage through my chest, ghost light exposing secrets as my garden revolts. Weeds appear and blossom, smear clear lung fields with unsown growth. Shuffling away from your raw stare, I raise my arms, ready for the season's turn. You'll embrace my breath and root through my still life. Fallow times will follow as my flora rots, so hold this image.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Irene Mathieu, and I'm a fourth-year medical student, so I'll be officially a poet MD in a few weeks. I guess it's close enough. And I'm going into pediatrics, and I'll be moving to Philadelphia for my residency training. So that's 3 years of specialized training in pediatrics. And I started writing before I knew how to physically write. When I was about 2, I used to tell my mom, I have really important things to say, please write this down. And she would dutifully write down everything that I thought was important at age 2. So I've always been interested in writing, and I think in retrospect, I've always been interested in stories and the therapeutic power of stories and listening and being heard. And I think that interest is kind of what led me to medicine, because I believe that fundamentally medicine works in a similar way. It's just a different set of tools that we use. And throughout med school, it's really provided balance from using the different parts of my brain. And so in med school, I'm learning to be very scientific and sort of use that methodical, evidence-based part of my brain. And then in poetry, I'm continuing to use the creative side of my brain and the art side. And I think ultimately those will converge and are already starting to converge, so I sort of progress in both realms. So the first poem is called Primum non nocere, which in Latin means first do no harm, which is of course a famous saying we have in medicine. And I think this came about thinking sort of about self-care, which we talk about in medicine a lot, and the first thing being to make sure that we ourselves are okay as providers and that we are in a mental and physical place to be able to heal other people. And I think sometimes that means playing a lot of different roles, whether it's mothering ourselves or being there for ourselves in ways that that maybe are a little bit different from people who don't have as emotionally draining careers. Primum non nocere. First, the soul must find a body. A monarch must fly into the mouth of a fetus. A mother must lay on her side, dreaming good dreams, stories that have no name. The opposite of love is power. A mother must be prepared to be powerless and terrified at all times. Any mothering soul a hibiscus, inverting by opening, offering nectar to any passing hummingbird. The blue-throated mountain gem has a heart that can beat 1,260 times per minute. It has a window of sky painted on its neck. You are both a small, frenetic body, tattooed with heaven, and a mother, a whole ecosystem mirrored behind your eyes. Hover, leave vortices in your wake, then welcome yourself. Smooth the air and speak good dreams into your fist. So this next one is called The Benediction of Our Lady of Hyperglycemia. And the disclaimer to this is that my poetry contains no medical advice, so that's just my disclaimer. But I sort of started thinking about this poem from stories my grandparents grew up in New Orleans, and stories that he would tell about the holidays and the foods that he grew up with, and sort of the parties and the festivities around holiday times. And it's just interesting to me, sort of reconciling in my head the positive emotions around those food-related memories with the things that I'm learning in medical school about eating healthy and living a healthy lifestyle, and sort of trying to reconcile that history with and food is a very important part of culture with what I know medically. The Benediction of Our Lady of Hyperglycemia. There are a lot of things they don't teach you in Catholic school. For instance, is there such a thing as overdosing on prayer? Does martyrdom become a health hazard at any point before knives are involved? How can we feel the quiet current of too much in our capillaries and root it out before fossilizing in sugar silt? If we clabber our blood, will we be considered for beatification? And isn't the fork a way to worship too? My grandpa is a down south Catholic. On Christmas, he said, they used to drink and box. He said they used to ride into the fields and suck juice from sugar cane. We're always full of gumbo, pecan pies, pound cake, hogshead cheese, blood sausage, red beans and rice, half-shell oysters, wouldn't dream of spilling a sweet sauce drop. This is the way it was done in New Orleans, the most Catholic city north of the Gulf. When you die thick-blooded, you will die full of tastes and walk through the door to the Holy Trinity simmering in pork fat. There are things you could eat or sacrifice, and someone would name you a saint on account of either one.
Well, it's always hard to follow these people up, but it has been quite interesting. I started writing, well, doing poetry, maybe writing would be the wrong word, when I was probably 7 or 8. My father was also a physician who wrote poetry and had a column in the local paper where he'd write a poem about hay fever, maybe, if that was what was going on that week, and had several books published. So I guess it runs in the family. My half-sister is also an anesthesiologist, and she wrote a lot of health books for ordinary people, for non-medical people. So there's been a lot of, quite a bit of writing in the family. I mostly kept this fairly secretive until 3 or 4 years ago. A few years ago, I had let it lapse for a while, started up again, and then had a reading, and it was really interesting. At my first reading, I felt like I was coming out of the closet or something. You know, it was very, it's a very self-revealing thing to do. And you occupy certain roles with regards to the people around you, and doing something like this transcends all those roles, or jumps outside them all, and can be a little bit embarrassing, or you feel like you're being maybe going to be embarrassed. And we're all, I think it's pretty clear that we don't necessarily think linearly as we go about our daily life. So anyway, that's a little bit of how we came to do this. I'm going to read self-help. A few years ago, when I started writing again, I decided I would write a group of poems which I was going to call 13 Poems for 5 Bypasses, all about cardiac surgery. And so this is one of those. Actually, they've expanded and it's gotten a different title. And so anyway, this is called Self-Help. And the point of view is that of a successful man. I thought being here in Williamson County, it would be a good place to channel this person who is now sick. And so he's always been what I call in my practice, I run across them once in a while, a master of the universe who now finds himself in a place where he can't control what happens. So this is called self-help. Visualize success. Make a 5-year plan, a 10. Dream big. You can do anything you want to if you want to bad enough. Captain of your own ship, master of your fate. What I want is just to sit in that chair a foot away and get there myself. What I want is no nurse leveraging my not quite dead weight, rocking back and forth, chanting the jovial countdown, 1, 2, 3, there. What I want, how bad is bad enough that you have to want? Don't accept no for an answer. Make expectations clear. So what is expectation here? The partner's visit, awkward in pastel shirts. Jack, you look great. Out of here in no time. Just concentrate on getting well. I know a lie when I see one, and I'm seeing more all the time. He's not himself, my daughters say. But which self? This one was apparently neatly tucked inside the other, waiting only the tap of misfortune to step out of its cracked shell, smaller, shaky, unable to think of anything except breakfast. And the room is a bit chilly. It's cashmere scarf. Which self? Look at me, dithering, turned into a philosopher, a pointless profession which I rightly despise. Never give up. Fight the good fight. Failure is not an option. I was raised on these stories of resurrection. Broke, but made another million. A man for whom bellhops hop too. The comeback kid, tough, willful, never down for the count. Spitting out deadlines, always a contract to be hammered out. Tailored shirt gleaming behind ice cubes and scotch. So who is this guy in the hospital gown? No, 2. One put on frontwards, one back. Shuffling around the nurse's station. Blue paper slippers, sandpapering the linoleum. Who? I feel like the octopus I saw a long time ago in Mykonos, a Swedish tourist banging it against the rock, bruised, unmoored, in the grip of an angry god. I used to be the god. Hollowed out, undone, all I can do is murmur vaguenesses reminiscent of the sea. Christ, what have they done with me? So that is from the point of view of someone who is ill. I'm going to read another poem from this series. A few weeks ago, our house burned down, which shouldn't happen to anyone, but it did. And before the house was properly burned down, actually, a friend of ours had called another friend, Bubba, who goes to Belize every winter for a few months. He has a fish smoking business there. And came and told us that Bubba's house was ready to move into. We could move into it anytime. So that's where we're staying right now. And Bubba actually called me up a few years ago and said, I started to eat dinner and I had this really bad chest pain. And I said, take an aspirin and call 911 for heaven's sake, you know. And he did, and he had heart surgery and did fine. So this is based on Bubba's story. I've taken some liberties there, but anyway. So what goes around comes around. This is called Uncomplicated. Hey, Doc, you saved my life. Not really. I did say, call the ambulance right now. Go. There was a series of ebullient emails, cardiac cath, bypass, a silly photoshopped picture with a nurse. Home by Tuesday. Back tending bar on the beach in no time flat, wearing a crazy palm frond hat. But I know he felt the brush of the dark wing. He knows I know. We have nothing to discuss, and that's that. I'm going to read one more, and then we'll go around again, since we were in a bird mode, okay? This is a poem about a robin. It's called Guest Worker, and we all tend to see things as how they work into our own personal view, our own life. So this is sort of two versions of the robin. This is called Guest Worker. Red robin, I thought you existed just for me, digging your little ditches in my front lawn, marking the turning of spring, crisp in your haberdasher's waistcoat, clean, a precise testimony to my orderly grass, my exceptional attention. I congratulate myself for noticing how you tip your head, listen for worms, drill your careful stitches, for my sensible life, which includes the great out of doors, your chirrups, your turquoise eggs like precious stones, last summer's nest on the kitchen table for my children to admire. They will learn empathy, how to fly, to notice small things. You do the things I ask, illustrate exactly the lessons I teach, the virtue of work and gratitude, persistence, showing up on time, not immigrating too far and rarely across borders, staying out of untidy crowds. That song, a cheerful whistle, yellow bill tipped up to this eternal sky. I carefully thank you. You look my way and nod. Yesterday, mud sucking at my boots, a flat sky dull with fog, striped ice still in the ruts of the road. There you were, lazy, crowding around with the other young toughs, perfectly wild. Your rusty anorak half hidden behind twig graffiti on a bodock branch. A dank wind raked cast-off leaves ankle-deep back and forth over the coyote trail scribbled across the bog. For the first time, I noticed the white ring around your eye, regarding me implacably behind the scrum of worn-out Queen Anne's lace, tangled teasel, the popped coffins of last year's milkweed, the devil's walking stick and its bare thorns, blackberry's maroon bones, a stuttering smart aleck, shuffling through the paper grass, poking your nose into the world's business, trickling out whatever music you wish. And I had thought we were just like family, my lawn, your neighborhood, where you felt at home. So everybody has a secret life, even the robin. I'm going to pass this back down. Let's go to the other end.
All right, well, thank you. Well, one nice thing about having a day job is that I'm not dependent on a certain kind of poetry, and also I haven't been writing long enough to have a particular voice, so when you see the radical schizophrenic differences between each poem, it's because I don't really know how to write poetry yet. So I'm working on it. Well, with your indulgence, I'm going to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum from some of my other stuff. to the hopelessly romantic. And so this is one I wrote for my wife, called Regret for the Impermanence of Light. After the storm, as clouds recede, amber rays of the reborn sun stream through the window in love's silver hair. They bloom in the glass of blood-red wine and stain my hands with distant light. Such perfect alignment, sun and cloud, love and wine, cannot endure. To ask extension would cheapen grace. So we bask in wonder till she takes my hand and smiles. I enjoy that one. It reminds me of, it was a particular moment. We were at a restaurant at the Yellow Porch over near 100 Oaks, and the sun was going down, and it suddenly went out from behind a cloud, and the sun came in a certain way, and this moment was there. And I guess that's one reason I would encourage everybody to write a bit of poetry, is to try and capture some of those moments and bring them back. So I still think about that whenever I look at this poetry. I encourage our house officers to write poems to each other, especially when we get around Valentine's Day. You ought to write poems to each other, right? Let me read one other romantic poem that came out of this 5:30 group where we meet every other week. One of the members of the group, as an exercise, gave us a first line, and we had to write the rest of the poem. And Brenda wrote one that is completely different than this. And so I thought it was very interesting to see different takes. I don't know if you happen to have that one with you or not.
I do.
Oh, great. Well, then we could go back and forth. So mine's is a bit shorter. This one's called, well, the first line was, "At breakfast this morning, I told a woman." So what are you going to do with a line like that? So here we go. At breakfast this morning, I told a woman that souls are shards of glass and endlessly seek their complement, that there is a closeness between sleeping lovers which awareness cannot rival, that the recess of a palm can match the curve of a cheek and hip forever, that an image of gray eyes narrowed with fatigue is etched in diamond and will never fade, that when a woman stretches through sunlight and her hair is set ablaze, it will kindle passion to a man's last breath. She pressed my hand and sighed, but her face was in shadow, so I could not tell if she was smiling. So that was fun to think about. Now, Brenda, you have a completely different take on this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let me let Brenda talk. It was a lot of fun to come to this group and see how everybody had different ideas.
So one of the fun things about writing is that you can adopt many different personas. So I can imagine what it would be like to be a master of the universe unexpectedly sick, okay? So this persona is definitely not me. It's a guy, I think. But anyway, this is called Waffle House. And remember the line, what was it? At breakfast, this was our prompt.
At breakfast this morning, I told them.
At breakfast this morning, I told a woman. Well, here's my version. At breakfast, I said to a woman, "That your red pickup? Get off anytime soon? The day rises." This is Waffle House. I said to a woman, "Light comes here a pixel at a time." I said to a woman, "Over easy, too." I said to a woman, "Don't look now." "What do you mean, no more?" At breakfast, I said to a woman, "This place is a box of light, is a beacon, a light unto a world in darkness." At breakfast, I said, "Surely goodness and mercy will follow." At breakfast, I said, "There is a moment when all things seem possible," and that was just it. At breakfast, I said to a woman, "Didn't you know ketchup is a vegetable?" At breakfast, I said to a woman, I spoke in praise of the short order cook, cracking eggs one-handed, sizzling on the grill, hash browns and alpha and omega of crisp. I said to a woman, "The day is coming, like it or not." I said to a woman, "This may be the first day of the rest of your life. This may be the last day." I leaned my elbows on the counter looking at the rain. I said to the woman, "You said it." I said, "Dawn is itself, sizzling and will soon disappear." I said, "The world will end in fire." I said, "This is a box of lost souls." I said, "Contents will settle in handling." I said, "Get off anytime soon, please." So, yeah, so we had a lot of fun when we were intern and resident together, I have to say. And although there was no such thing as the Butkaroos,
I wish there had been.
I wish there had been. One of the unit clerks was a musician. And this wasn't our team, though. It was at the VA, but a little later. And he wrote what he called a jazz opera called Team 4 about us, and played it in one of the dives downtown. So that was sort of fun. But it's always something. Okay, Doug. Talk a little bit about sound, and I mean, why is a poem and not just a stretch of prose that you read slow?
A lot of people disagree about that. So, and they're like professional writer types. I think Coleridge said, prose is the best words, and poetry is the best words in the best order. Or was it? No. Sorry, I can't even get that right. Prose is words in the best order. Poetry is the best words in the best order. But boy, I don't know what makes it. They're definitely sonic devices that go on in poetry, and also a little bit with some people more attention to meter and emphasis and things like iambic pentameter from Shakespeare that trouble many of us in bad ways. But I don't know what makes a poem. There's even this genre of prose poetry that tries to straddle the line of both. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
But you're studying for the MFA.
I know, and it's hard. Sometimes I'll read stuff in poetry, which is sort of the big journal. I'm like, I don't think this is a poem, and the next page will be something that's just so beautiful, and I don't know what makes something beautiful to me and not. And then sometimes I come back to something that wasn't poetry, and it is, and I don't know why that's the case. So I'll give you some travel writing. We'll go to Boston briefly, and then to Mississippi. There is a genre of poetry called ekphrasis, I believe is how you say it, where poets write about art, and this is primarily done because artists don't paint about poetry, and so it's some way to dialogue with something else. And I think it's really asking you as a listener or reader to come into a place with the writer, and when it's talking about a painting, there's a third person in the conversation they're painting. This would be better if I could show you the painting, so you'll just have to imagine it. But a dentist named Morton and a physician named Crawford Long were racing in the 1840s for very different reasons, and I don't think they were aware of each other, to come up with anesthesia. Crawford Long was taking care of patients and did not seem to have any sort of utilitarian motive, and I think Morton was looking to get rich quick, is sort of how it's portrayed. And Morton is more famous. He sought more publicity, and there's actually something called the Ether Dome on Harvard's campus, one of their medical schools, where the first anesthesia was performed, although many people say it happened in Georgia before that. So this is composed in the Bullfinch Building's Surgical Amphitheater while viewing Ether Day, 1846, a painting by Warren and Lucia Prosperi. Ungloved hands appear to restrain the painted patient, his head turned away, inviting the metal blades to invade, dissect his neck, carve the cervical growth. Men in expensive dark hues lean towards the operation. They clench fists, grab lapels, watch each cut. They inhale quietly whiffs of this magic. Clear ether wafts through the colored oils, the fragrance diffusing from their faces, the sweet carbon binding this man in red striped white. Organic vapors roil in his blood and deflect the pain as the eldest slices. His thin-rimmed glasses are flecked with arterial spray. To keep cuffs clean, his sleeves are rolled up. His legs straddle the patient. The unpaintable moves these still men. The gas of surgery without screams, even as blood dribbles down the neck, the white cloth, the bare fingers of history. The tumor leaves in silence, and the gentlemen physicians, still anesthetized, exhale, savoring the first scent of that which is, quote, no humbug. And that was the description of the first anesthetic, was this is no humbug, because a lot of people thought it was not going to work. So one last trip. This one.
I like the way you have the onlooking physicians anesthetized, captured by that.
They're still frozen, just like that, if you Google the picture. This is spraying cotton in Bolivar County, Mississippi, the summer following my first year of medical school. The tractor wheels cut hard coming to the turn row that runs along the county line near the evergreen copse in Paradise's South 40 acres. In the wake of the tire tread, a dull patch flashes within the white blur beneath me. Exposed bone blooms among the lobe leaves of cotton. 5 vertebrae lie bleached and unstrung. I idle the machine, lurching to rest as diesel fumes rise in a dirge to these remains at the field's edge. I stand to see better. They are lumbar, without facets to hold ribs, maggots having cleaned away the meat and stringy tendons. Dried up buckshot mud fills the spinal canal. Hesters have farmed this field for 4 generations, and as best I know, I am not related to this back. I have seen others, though. A woman this past fall. We were told to start on the spine, stay removed, impersonal. Yet intimacy surprised me, cracking open her cranium, lifting her brain from its vault, guiding a rusty hacksaw down her forehead and between her eyes, through her nose and lips and buck teeth, stopping when the blade touched tongue. Dozens of muscles clung to the skull, and it took weeks to tease them apart. We only spent a day on her back. There's neither education nor glory in the lumbar vertebrae. Brains have blood pulsing inside, cycling furiously in our heads and imaginations. Spines just stand and do the heavy work of lifting without recognition, like this man who outlasted the rusty iron hoe he swung. Maybe his kin buried him here, or maybe this was where he fell on the last day of labor. The lumbar bones make a good monument. Brains wouldn't last long in the heat. Below my cap, sweat cuts down my forehead, glabella, the anatomist taught, distancing us with Latin, and into my mouth. I taste the salt and dirt of this old plantation and know this field will remain in me when I leave in September. I taste myself. The sun lowers itself into the slough. Evening looms, illuminating this green past and the moist soil dissolved in blood. I shift the tractor in gear as cotton balls swallow the bones with a tongue of snow. My parents grew up on a farm, and I play there in summers.
I think one of the big parallels for me between poetry and medicine is that both poets and physicians, I believe, have, as part of our job descriptions, an obligation to sort of identify patterns in society and to speak out. And so as physicians, we're trained to identify patterns in the human body, to figure out diseases and diagnose properly and treat. But I think another part of being a professional is to take it to the next step and identify patterns, societal patterns, and things that we see happening around us, and kind of look for the underlying cause of not only that individual's illness, but the illnesses of society in general. And I think as poets, we also are called to be observers of the human condition and to sort of offer whatever insights we can to try to provide some sort of therapeutic benefit for society. And so these next couple poems are exploring that theme a little bit more. This first one is called Nuestra Señora de Tennessee Supplicates Coatlalopeu. And some background for this one is that I wrote this between my 3rd and 4th year of medical school. And I actually took a year and did research, which is becoming a more and more common thing for med students to do. And I was doing a full year of research on this randomized controlled trial to prevent childhood obesity that's happening at Vanderbilt and in several other sites around the nation. And as part of this research, I got to go and visit families in parts of Nashville that I probably otherwise never would have gone. And it was really a privilege to be invited into people's homes for data collection and interviews and to see how my patients and my future patients lived. Because as I said, these are neighborhoods where maybe I never would have found myself if it weren't for this study. And so this poem has a little epigraph that I'll read that comes from the book Borderlands, La Frontera, The New Mestiza, which is by Gloria Anzaldúa. And I read that that year when I was doing this research. And so the epigraph is as follows. La Virgen de Guadalupe's Indian name is Coatlalopeu. Coatlalopeu is descended from, or is an aspect of, earlier Mesoamerican fertility and earth goddesses. The earliest is Coatlicue. Before the change to male dominance, Coatlicue, the lady of the serpent skirt, contained and balanced dualities of male and female, light and dark, life and death. That's from Borderlands, La Frontera. So here's the poem. The sun, dust to dust colored, every rustling thing, and every unmoving metal scrap on the frontera, which is nowhere near a border. The dust-colored grass wrangles up through asphalt, the dust-colored billboards. Your ad here. Call Tiffany. Advertise here. The dust-colored pockmarks on her teeth, supermercado y carniceria, discount tobacco, Latino America auto sales, church of the pebble-biting, grit-fisted niñas with ponytails like switches, church of the quick-eyed boys, sullen-eyed boys, eyes behind bent blinds, hands covered in dust, church of the hands covered in dust. Discount tobacco, Video City, police SUVs shiny as toys beside a scab-colored pickup, church of the advanced cash title loans. 10 in a dust-colored trailer. Down the road is Miracle Baptist Church. Church of the Frontera is dusted over with peeling sideboards, with a very small cockroach you almost don't notice. The 8 children drunk off sugar, pretending this isn't the edge of the world, like they don't tow a frontera and have dust-colored dreams. And I really love sort of the crossover between medicine and poetry because my PI, my principal investigator, who was essentially my boss that year and my mentor on the research, actually, she is a national expert on childhood obesity, and she actually took this poem and read it at a grand rounds presentation she gave at another institution. So I was pretty honored by that, and I really liked how she was able to share my vision of integrating poetry and medicine. And this next poem is called Our Boy, and it was written sort of in the wake of the recent spate of shootings, often by police officers of people of color. And so it's dedicated to Jordan Davis, Renisha McBride, Trayvon Martin, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Tamir Rice, and the others. Our boy. It's 2 years now our boy's been gone. 2 years since the brightness closed. Our boy was bright. If you could have seen him, he would have burned straight through your retinas into your brain, passed down the blood vessels in your neck into your heart. You couldn't help smiling at our boy. They said those blood vessels are what the bullet blew out, lead dynamite going off in the dark tunnel that carried life all through his body. No train could pass through the wreckage, the system amuck. They say first your heart beats faster, and then your breath picks up, trying to make the difference. But nothing undoes a mountain quicker than an explosion. You can go down the hill behind our house, where our boy used to play, and cross the muddy creek and fight the brambles until the woods give way to an open field. Beyond it, you'll see the bald skulls of mountains. Some men find nothing sacred, not even their mother. Some will kill because it's their inheritance. Our boy was bright, brighter than anything could be pulled from a mine. Our boy was the mountain. It's been years since anything sacred was respected. Blasting through that child's vessels must have been nothing, but then you know nothing of how he made them, putting our love into a big mixing bowl and stepping aside so the earth could work through us, the most sacred work we ever did. The brightness burst out of us, and we thought this was finally a light that would never turn off, even though we went to bed every night with prayers between our teeth. If you could have seen our boy, I swear, it might have put the pieces back in place. It might have closed the circle. We might have been safe all together. I'll read one more. So one of my goals in medical school was to publish my first book of poetry before I graduated, and I did that. And so this is my book. So shameless plug, I have copies if anyone wants to buy it after. And it's called The Galaxy of Origins. It was published by Dancing Girl Press, which is a small press in Chicago that really focuses on promoting emerging women writers. So I'll pick one from the book. Try to pick a little bit of a lighter one. Let's see. Okay, so since it seems like a lot of us have been reading love poems, I'll throw in my obligatory love poem. This is called cataplexy, which is a medical word. It's a condition in which a strong emotion can precipitate sudden loss of all muscular tone. So crying, laughing, sudden anger makes a person just lose their ability to control any muscles, and they often fall on the ground, completely paralyzed for a second almost. And it's more common in people who have narcolepsy. And so I guess something about the idea of cataplexy stuck in my head when we learned that and became a metaphor. And I've been thinking recently about Mark Doty, who wrote his famous Mackerel poem and then wrote an essay about that poem in which he discusses the idea of the metaphor happening before we're even aware of it. And then it takes the process of writing the poem to understand what was the metaphor behind that image or that word or that moment that caught our attention. And so in my case, I guess it was this disease that caught my attention in class, and I wrote a poem about it that has nothing to do with medicine. Cataplexy. There is nothing to write about but love, and everyone writes about love. I used to think I was not everyone, but now I see that I am you, and you are the man you sat beside on the bus this morning, who smelled funny, whose elbows you resented. I used to think I was me and you were you, until I let myself be the song and pronouns dissolved. I love like jumping into a pool, a slack-muscled rush of blue. I love like a plane taking off, throwing your heart out the window as your body leaves the earth. The meeting of eyes causes cataplexy and the sudden work of gravity. Nothing can be held for long. The things in your hands shatter on the pavement, not worth your fingers' work. Your hands draw water toward your mouth. Don't be surprised that they are my hands. You will write about love too, or you won't write at all.
Okay, shameless plug. Shameless plug. Yes, this is actually a homemade chapbook. And unfortunately, at this instant, I have some more being made. So if you're interested, this is the only one I have right now. You can sign up and we can make arrangements, okay? This is called Altered Geography, Little Marrowbone. We live out in the Bells Bend area, near Little Marrowbone Lake, Little Marrowbone Creek, and Little Marrowbone Road. And so these are all what I call hyper-local poems. They're all written, well, Waffle House is in there, so we do get as far down the road as White Bridge Road, and but that's about as far as we go. So these are all local poems, and this is dedicated to my husband, who brought me to that neighborhood. Speaking of love, and let's see here. I'm looking for one in particular. But, this is called Poolside. It was published in the Cortland Review. And we do have a swimming pool, and everybody used to come by and go swimming. So this is a little bit about my husband. He is the husband in the story. And the husband stands in the shallow end. Neighbor children climb him like a monument. My husband is 6'5.5", so indeed this is true. Okay. The husband stands in the shallow end. Neighbor children climb him like a monument. One by one, he pitches them ripe like little melons, arcs of sweet terror sprawling through the air. Giggling, they minnow back for another trip. The neighbor wives turn from side to side, think dim thoughts behind their shades of the skimpy husbands they have left behind, or will leave, or will not, of the mottled light turning like salamanders around his underwater legs, of the weight of a column of air, the weight of a column of water, of that Katie, not so long ago a nubbin at her breast, flying from a man's arms, feathered in the simple elements, scattering droplets like reckless diamonds, heading for the deep end. And Katie is out there all grown up. She was a waitress at Gerst House for a while and is doing interesting things. So anyhow, that's altered geography. I'm going to read. This is called The Man in the Yellow Suit. And one of our colleagues' son is here. This young man's father was in training with us, and so we know him. And he knows Stephen Schillig. This is really written about Dr. Schillig, who was the cardiologist at General Hospital for many years, for his entire career, in fact, and started the ambulance service, the first ambulance service in Nashville. There may have been a private ambulance, maybe it was the first public ambulance service in Nashville. And Dr. Schillig was an interesting character. All of us remember him with great fondness. He was rather taciturn, but had this very dry sense of humor, and was very retiring. He very much did not like the spotlight. So he got a lot done, and yet there are no monuments to Dr. Schillig. So this is called The Man in the Yellow Suit, and it's an actual description of somebody I met in the emergency room when I was an intern, taking care of whoever walked in. And the person who walked in was the man in the yellow suit. And anyway, so this is for Stephen Schillig. And I mean yellow, canary yellow, a preacher's collar, two-tone platform shoes, white hat, sitting on the ER gurney, hunched, heavy hand to breastbone, in pain again. On the road, traveling exactly how no one knew. Oklahoma City 2 weeks ago. Have to be in Detroit the beginning of the month. Since Tuesday, Nashville. Something about a post office box, staying with a colored pastor for a while, the kindness of strangers. What is really true, brother, except this pain? Are you saved? The intern knew what to do, everything. Admit, rule out, the heart is tricky, you never know, not so fast. Dr. Schillig, who never used 2 words if one would do, listened, unimpressed. Called cardiology in Oklahoma, Kansas City. Cathed twice, heart's okay. Conjured up a ticket to Detroit. Bus, lunch. Who is the mythic figure after whom nothing is named? You never know. Unassuming, diffident, performing miracles behind your back. So that was Dr. Schillig. He somehow could always, he had a little slush fund there somewhere and could find money for that ticket if we had to get this guy back to Detroit. And, anyway, he was a great man. Was he not?
Definitely. I can vouch for that.
Okay. I'm going to read one more, and then we'll move down the row again. This is called April, Taylor Hollow. I don't know if anyone here knows Taylor Hollow. Keith does. It's a beautiful place, not too far from here. It belongs to the Nature Conservancy, and it's the most gorgeous display of mountain wildflowers in the spring that exists. And 2 or 3 years ago, some of us went. We have a friend who lives on the edge of Taylor Hollow, so we went to their house, went hiking in Taylor Hollow, and went back to the house for the rest of the afternoon, and hence April and Taylor Hollow. And it's April right now, and Bubba's house is in a hollow, and I'm looking at some of these same flowers right now. So, leafing out, the trees blur in green mist, celandine poppies, bright fingerprints at their feet. The persistent creek, I need to say one more thing. One of the things, this poem winds up talking about wake robins, which is another word that the country people used to use for trilliums. Not the white ones, the ones that have, they have purple, kind of 3 purple petals that stand up. So that's the wake robin. Leafing out, the trees blur in green mist, celandine poppies, bright fingerprints at their feet. The persistent creek has hollowed dips, roundels, arches into the limestone floor. Waterleaf, twin leaf, spring beauties wander beside blue-eyed Mary, larkspur. The trout lilies are mostly gone. Jacob's ladder has not yet arrived. Seersucker sedge returning, green fists knocking along the slopes. The pickup truck is stuck, mud up to the hubs at the bottom of the hill. And the guys turn up late, raucous, bat away the big dog, shuck their dirty boots at the door, rattle the refrigerator for a beer. No one wants to leave this talk about tractors, drag chains, Buddha in Texas, exactly when that shotgun was fired into the air, the first hummingbird of the year, that time the symphony conductor, a glorious specimen himself, called you a bon vivant. And how to identify wake robins, their 3 purple hands folded as in prayer, not in belief, not in supplication, simply a statement of how things are. Should we do maybe one more round, a short round, and then do you have any questions? Okay. Yes.
Does your group have a name, like the Fugitive Two or something?
Well, Dr. Birchmore back there is our master. And what do you call us? He gives us a different name every time we meet.
Well, let's see. The Tennessee Valley Agrarian Society of Living Poets and Playwrights and The agrarian is in honor of Vanderbilt.
Well, or in honor of the agrarians from Vanderbilt. So yes, the name changes. And then there is a group that meets in the anesthesia department, which Doug is part of. So there's at least 2 groups. And poetry has infected the anesthesia department. Converted. There is no cure. Brian?
We'll do a few more. We appreciate your patience. You guys have been wonderful. As I promised, there's not really a theme in what I write about, except you might notice that I think it's a byproduct of all of the scientific training in medical school for all the years that some of the metaphors are not quite the same. So this one has a little bit of that. This one's called standing waves. Should be avoided. Their unexpected power can crumble foundations, no matter how anchored. My father was a static wave, until the Scotch increased the amplitude past the strength of his heart, and the rhythm looked like double jump ropes whipping the same spot on the pavement in August. But death is an inexact eraser, and even years after consigning a body to flame, there can still be expectation of greeting when the door opens. The particle is gone, but the wave remains. So I've kind of enjoyed that. There's all this stuff. If you guys have taken much science, they talk about whether there's something is a particle or something is a wave, and what are we all made of. And so I've had some fun thinking about that. Also, double jump ropes is a sort of ventricular tachycardia rhythm, which in the ICU we see on occasion. So I don't know why I thought about them as double jump ropes, but that showed up one day. I have a short one. Another in the bird series that they got published in the Annals of Internal Medicine last year, and I had a good time with it. It's very short. I guess it's. I enjoyed the writings of William Carlos Williams, who was a physician who wrote very short poems. It said that he had a busy private practice. He was a primary care physician, and he would limit the size of them to prescription pads between patients. So a lot of his poems were quite short. I don't know if that's entirely true, but many of them are. And This one's called The Last Watcher. I hope the birds never forget what their renaissance meant to the old woman, nestled on the sloping porch beneath a beige afghan after the stroke. I always liked some of his writings because when I would listen to them or read one of his poems, suddenly I would look up and wonder, have I been gone for an hour or 30 minutes? And I'd have kind of a mental vacation when I'd read some of his images. The last one, which, and then I'll pass on the microphone, more of the bird series, which keeps showing up, but not really about birds, I guess. This one's called Bird Watching. Once in an alley somewhere between Gary and Chicago, I wounded a pint-sized, grimy, old rummy-ex sniper by doubting his knowledge of the 17 North American kestrels, which proved to be comprehensive as best I could tell. Despite his pronounced tremor, snotty gray beard, foul breath, and tendency to fall prostrate and moan when the incoming flew too low near O'Hare, I shared my alley and showed him where to pee so it drained to the street away from our fridge boxes with holes in the side walls so we could whisper at night. His voice caught as he whispered of the bird's short stature, its pugilistic ways and sexual ambiguity, at least to us, and how they hover before dropping like missiles from heaven, sent to recycle tiny grasshopper souls into mourning doves, who announce the grief of the world each day at sunrise as I retrieve the daily from the dumpster. I guess I take care of a lot of folks who don't have a lot of money, and I wonder a bit about how they live and what they think about, and maybe what they're tormented with at night. I don't know if they think about kestrels or birds at all, but but I do. Or I can pass
Have
that
you ever
on.
spent the night in a cardboard box?
Not in an alley.
Channeling that very well,
Oh,
you know.
I say, yeah. What, as a small child, I was an imaginary playmate. So so perhaps I did spend some time in cardboard boxes as a child.
Well, I'll just offer one short one, because it's the only one I have memorized because it's short, and I'm out of printed material for you. And this one is just about place, both as a poet and a physician. And it's called An Intern's Recollection of a Night at the VA on Call, July 2004. When the code was over and a perfusing rhythm returned and the new chest tube was on suction, my resident offered me some feedback. The line was in the wrong place, like me. And that's it. And a line is a big IV we sometimes put around somebody's collarbone, and when not done well, it can end up not in a vein behind the collarbone, but in the lung, which is also behind the collarbone. And that can lead to some bad things, as in the fictitious patient in that poem. And sometimes I wonder what I'm doing in medicine, and sometimes I wonder what I'm doing in poetry, and I feel like I need to be in the other place. So I'll leave you with that one, and I appreciate you guys being here.
I'll read a couple more. This one I wrote last year after reading an article online from a website called PolicyMike.com, and the title of the article was "One of Africa's Most Treasured Species Could Be Completely Wiped Out by 2020," and it was about the rhino. And I've been thinking about this poem because even though I wrote it a year ago, I just saw some news that in the past week, one specific species of the black rhino, I don't really know where they live, somewhere in Africa, has officially been declared extinct. So this is called "If All You Can Think Of Are the Rhinos." After reading where a man from a foundation said that there will probably be no free-living rhinos, as the remaining numbers will be fenced off in military-style compounds which are alarmed and heavily guarded by armed patrols. And you write to the last rhinos before they go extinct in a jail run by a foundation to save them. You will feel a few kinds of sad. You in a place that long stopped loving you, breathing its air still. Someone's rainy season, someone's forest fire. A baby rhino is called a calf, as in, there's a pain in my. Someone's lost calf dancing away forever. The rhino's cut trunks in the picture look like conical trees laid down to die, rotted log innards. The heroes are the park rangers reportedly gunned down by blood ivory gangs. The article says the British are sending help, which is a few kinds of sad, such as every watercolored thought running down your arms, and also inertia, an object in motion. The water balloon clouds want to suffocate us, the homicidal sky. Did you hear the theory about global warming? The Earth's fever. She's better off without us. No such thing as an outside force. This last poem is a travel poem. I actually studied international relations in college, so not a science major at all. And I was able to travel quite a bit, mostly in Latin America. And I spent a year between college and medical school doing research in the Dominican Republic. And I think for years I'd been trying to write a poem about the capital, Santo Domingo, which is where I lived, and I finally wrote it after several years of sort of ruminating on it. This poem is called The City. The city's a party of ghosts. Bricks couldn't snuff out the spirits. You can see how their dancing breaks open sidewalks soft as tres leches. The city's a party of mosquitoes, spindly wings crammed into suit jackets, singing politics into darkened blocks where people slap away the stings, tired. The city's a party of babies, honey-plump babblers grabbing at dogs, at breasts, at other babies. There are more of them every year. The city's a party of slaves. There are bloody corners, the sound of chains raking open brains, their sour rage. The city's a party of fathers. Some stone fathers become gods on Independence Day. Some sweaty fathers just make more mothers, and others work like gods beside invisible women who sweat darker. Por la patria, they all pronounce. The city's a party of dogs. The barking can drown out motorcycles, screams, church choirs. Some limber, nipples dragging to nests of pups in alleys. Some follow tourists, wagging too happy like hustlers. The city's a party of martyrs in the only country where martyrs party. Not in New World cathedrals, these martyrs are old school, howling on the docks of ships or swaying in corner stores, swearing over the din of dancing forever and never, island promises. Thank you all for listening.
I'm going to read one final poem. This is called Amaryllis, and I actually wrote it a long time ago. And it was published in the Cumberland Review, which I don't know if there's any old literary people here, but it was a really good poetry review that was in Nashville until probably the late 80s, maybe early 90s, but it no longer exists. So this is called Amaryllis. You all know what amaryllis are, those really incredibly bold flowers. So this is Amaryllis. Death comes like a chrysanthemum, ordered with love in a distant city, but delivered by a stranger pale with good taste. I want death to be an amaryllis, an awkward bulb stewing in a green pot on a shelf above the kitchen sink, sprouting buds like spoons and leaves like a bunch of knives. I want you to watch my kitchen death take shape while you do the dishes. A plant with knees and elbows and bad manners, and not remember whether it was a white death we ordered or red. I want a death with a flower like a tomahawk that will make the neighbors faint for plain crazy loveliness. Nothing like it, they will say, when they stop by with a sack of tomatoes, or to tell you that the white calf jumped the cattle gap and is on the road. Never seen nothing quite like it. I want a death like the amaryllis we gave away. Honey, it budded 7 buds, Nancy said. She couldn't keep it to herself. Carried it to Brother Frank's house. Can't get out much, his lungs, you know. And he called up everyone he knows on the telephone. He's that proud of that flower, Nancy said. That's what I want. I want it slow to arrive, my kitchen death, and something for the house to be that proud of? So nobody said you couldn't end a poem with the word of. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about process? I'm a writer myself, and lots of times I think of things in the shower or when I'm driving a car, not convenient places to write down. Have you been in the middle of surgery and thought of something you wanted to write?
Yes, but
Here's the guy who's in the middle of surgery.
the nice thing about being an anesthesiologist is usually my hands are free and not in sterile gloves and inside somebody. I don't process for me is a lot just about image, and so I do lose images in places where I can't write them down, but a lot of times the good images hopefully stick around and I come back to them when I can write.
Do you set aside a certain amount of time in a certain place?
I wish. No, it's just random. It's just whatever here and there, and try to get the bits and pieces. Yeah, try to do it daily, but it does not happen daily.
Say something about or other than being schizophrenic.
Yeah, which everyone can tell. Sometimes you're right. You get little images, you get ideas. Sometimes I'll overhear a conversation, but I'll mishear it, and I'll hear some amazing phrase that I think I've got to get that down. So I tend to keep little notebooks. I suppose I should be more into this millennium and be, maybe I should be using Dragon and dictating to myself or something. But mostly I scroll it down and have a few notes, and then I come back to them later, and I'll see those phrases, and I'll think that needs to fit with something else I've scrolled down. And sometimes something comes together, and occasionally, I don't know if you ever experienced that, you'll suddenly sit down and an entire piece just delivers itself, and you think, I didn't really write that. That just came from somewhere else. I was just here as a conduit for it.
Sometimes I think that you're working on it in the background all along, and then it's kind of like a computer that just kind of...
That must be it, that you've been working on it for quite a while, kind of ruminating. And,
Yeah.
and so
I've had things that I know I have to do, a particular assignment that or an article that I have to write, and I'm just not in the mood, so I don't start on it. And if I wait for the mood, I do a lot better job.
I think that's right.
And it just kind of pours out, and it's over real quickly.
Yeah, so it's wonderful when it comes like that, isn't it? So here, let me pass on. I'm sure other people have thoughts.
I definitely need to try to be a little more systematic. I think it's hard when you're a medical student or a physician to have the time to sit and write every day. And I agree with what some other folks have said. I think sometimes I operate on inspiration and instinct, and sometimes just when I feel like I need to write something, I just sit there and it comes out, and it's probably something I've been working on subconsciously for days or weeks or years. But for me, when I have an image or an idea or something that catches my eye, I do try to write it down, either just on a piece of paper or just in my phone. Sometimes I'll just take notes and have a little note thing started. Sometimes it's snatches of conversation and just interesting things that you just overhear people say, which happens a lot. And both, I would say, in traveling and kind of out in the world and in medicine. And sometimes it's conversations you may not be a part of, and you hear one little sentence and you think, wow, I could put this in a totally different context and create an entire metaphor around it and not need to know anything else about what was going on in that scene. So, and then sometimes, like last night, I had a poem that I felt like wasn't totally finished or something missing from it, but I couldn't tell what. And then I read another poem I had written previously and that I sort of abandoned, and I realized, oh, these two need to be melded together. And I just took bits and pieces and kind of stitched them together. So my process is not very organized. It needs to be more organized, and I'm working on that, but I think it will be hard during residency to create the kind of discipline that I need ideally.
Yeah, part of the thing is that you actually do need some downtime. I call it veg time, really. If you're involved in, as we were in our internship and residency and much of what we do, and doing something all the time, it's very hard for things to come out of that, other than bits and pieces. But you need a little downtime. Things need to be sort of vegetate. And, I tend to, if I have an idea, I tend to sit down and completely free associate as much as I can, just sort of do a big dump, and then go back and pick it apart and try to, although you might not have been able to tell, I'm very interested in rhythm and the sounds of words, not necessarily rhyme, but the way things sound, sort of the if I were better at it, I might call the jazz part of poetry, you know, not just the meaning, but the music part. And so I have to play with that, and, you know, that's the way it is. So, very good question. Anybody else? Yes.
This is Sydney, and she's, and so she goes to work if someone comes and Miss Williams taught it.
Miss Williams taught it? Did I hear that right? A word? Aha. Thank. Those are your nannies, and they taught you some words? Uh-huh, okay. So thank you very much for your time and attention. There's always a lot more room outside the box than in it. I just would like to let you know that, so I encourage you all to, yes.
Okay, well, can I still ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
This was just amazing. Thank you so much. I'm not a poet, but I love poetry, and I am actually just interested in what it means to you. I think somebody mentioned William Carlos Williams, I think, was it? Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm not an expert on him, and I can't really even paraphrase what he said, but it was almost like he couldn't decide being a physician or being a poet, you know, and then actually some of you have mentioned that, have, you know, which was the avocation, which was the vocation, you know, sort of. But I am interested in hearing what poetry means to you, to be a poet, and what kind of role it plays in your life, if you're willing to talk about that.
Well, let me, I am reluctant really to, it's only been in the last year or two maybe. You know, to call yourself a poet is a very, to me it sounds like a very self-aggrandizing and almost egotistical thing to say. Oh, I'm a poet, you know, so I have a hard time sometimes, but it is unquestionably true that I do write these things that look a lot like poems, you know, that is very true.
It's getting harder and harder to deny, Brenda.
It is. I'm coming further out of the closet, but it's,
The more great poems she publishes, it gets harder and harder.
so anyway, and it's hard to say what, it's just something I do. I don't know that it, you know, it's just there. You know, I don't think it, in fact, some people might think that because you wrote a great poem, you're deep. You know, that's not necessarily true. You know, you put words together and sometimes depth appears, but that's not the same. Do you know what I'm saying? So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So I think I've sort of hinted at this in some of my earlier discussions before poems, but I think kind of to counter what you said, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got as a writer was another writer who told me, you have to take yourself seriously as a writer. Nobody bestows upon you the title of poet or writer. You decide that's what you are based on the fact that you write poetry, and you take it seriously and you approach it with dedication and discipline and a level of care and integrity that you should approach any other type of profession. And so that's how I sort of look at the idea of being a poet. And I think, what does poetry mean? Again, hearkening back to another teacher I had, a poet who taught, I attended a workshop, a 2-week workshop last summer, and one of the poetry teachers said, you know, you have to love the field more than you love the sound of your own voice. It has to be about a conversation. Poetry is a conversation that has been going on since human beings began speaking, since we had language. It's always existed in every society. And so it's being part of that longitudinal, cross-cultural, global conversation that poetry is. And so I always try to keep that in mind, because I think I was more of the Emily Dickinson type poet, just write things down in my journal and I didn't really know how to participate in the larger conversation of poetry because I didn't study it in college. I never went to grad school for it. And only in the past few years have I really started to publish and try to get to know other poets and become more engaged and deliberate about reading poetry, and always making sure I'm reading something and I'm learning about what other people are doing and what other people have to say. And so to me, it's just being part of a global conversation that is another way of knowing. I'm part of a medical conversation, which is a very, biomedical, scientific, empirical way of understanding, and that's another conversation that's been going on for a while and is happening globally. And so to me, this is just another way of understanding the world and of understanding the human experience. And so it's kind of like being part of speaking another language or something. And I think it comes with both privileges and responsibilities and obligations. So that's what poetry means to me.
Let me just say one other thing. Although I was in the closet, I have to say, I worked on my poems and I finished them and I kept everything and typed it all out, and it looked really good, and I've been doing that since I was about 10. So I have this, I'm not completely unprofessional.
I guess going back, having another swing at the what is a poem. Maybe there's some things that can only be said in a poem because they flirt with the border of what language can do, and we know there's something beyond language, the life, whether it's love or death, which has been a lot of our themes. And so maybe a poetry, it's written in a structure that signals to all of us readers of writers that this is where language is going to end, but there's something beyond that, and that's what we really are as humans, whether it's suffering, love, death, etc. And maybe I just feel like I have things to say I can't say in words, so I try to say in poetry because that goes to that border.
For quite a while, I was the associate director of the medical intensive care unit at Vanderbilt Hospital, and I've done intensive care for more than 30 years. I've seen a lot of people leave this life, and I've seen a lot of tragedy and a lot of joy, and I guess we get so busy in medicine sometime, we're moving from place to place, like, okay, that's done, move on, the other person needs help. And it began to strike me, it seems wrong to move forward too quickly, or at least without making a point of reflecting on what happened. The other day I was walking into the hospital and I saw an older woman. She was wheeling a wheelchair and it had a walker braced on it with one of those rolled up egg crate mattresses, and there was a DOP kit, And it just crossed my mind that maybe she just lost her husband. And that we spend time working with families and patients, but we don't know that could just be the beginning of a whole nother journey. It just seemed like maybe I should think about that. We have so many opportunities for personal growth, that a chance to reflect about what's going on, it just seems like a bit of reverence is due, and poetry is a way to distill some of that experience to me.
Books by S.R. Lee. Lined up again and again, stacked, straightened, stored, they break rank, twist a bit, slide an inch, swing round, turn their backs, push away, circle, wander to the porch, hide in a corner. How they resist the neat rows humans associate with their work, assume to be their duty. Given a chance, they may be as chaotic as their readers.